Little Fox.
Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 1, Shipwrecked. In 1674, I was born on my father's small estate in Nottinghamshire, England.
"What a fine, strong boy,"
said my father.
"I think he will be a clever and good man like his grandfather."
I agree,
said my mother.
Let's name him Lemuel after your father.
My childhood was very happy. I liked going to school and learning new things, but I often used to daydream about going to sea. One day, Father asked,
"Lemuel, have you thought about your future? I think you would be a good doctor."
I wanted to please him, so I said, "Yes, Father, I'll go to Cambridge University and study medicine." But as I spoke, I was thinking, at university, I can also learn things that will be useful to a sailor. After several years of study, I became a doctor. Not long after, I asked my sweetheart, Mary, to marry me.
Lemuel,
She replied.
I would be very happy to marry you.
Before long, we had children, a boy and a girl. They gave us great joy. I enjoyed being a doctor for the first few years. But then I became bored, and ideas of travel filled my mind. I imagined wandering to far-off places and seeing wonderful new things. "Mary," I said one day, "I need more adventure in my life. The captain of a ship about to sail has offered me a job as the ship's doctor."
Oh dear,
Mary replied.
the children and I will miss you very much, and I'll worry about you. When will you come back?
"I don't know how long the journey will take," I told her, "but I promise I will return. And when I do, I'll tell you and the children all about my adventures." So in 1699, I set sail on the Antelope from Bristol. That city is a large and very old port in the southwest of England. From the dock, Mary called out,
Goodbye, and please be careful. Come back to us soon.
The children waved to me and I waved back. The captain was a good man and had sailed a great deal. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Gulliver," he said. "First we'll be sailing down the Atlantic Ocean and around the coast of Africa. Then we'll sail through the Indian Ocean to the South Seas." Our journey went well until one morning, somewhere near Tasmania, in the South Pacific Ocean. "I don't like the look of those clouds," the captain said. "I think a storm is coming." Within an hour, a violent storm began. The sea rose in great, angry waves, much taller than the Antelope. The wind, now as strong as a hurricane, made a terrible sound. "The wind is blowing the ship off course," shouted the captain. "Look out!" Suddenly, with a loud crack, the Antelope hit some rocks and broke in half. The sailors fell into the sea. Many of them could not swim. The ship sank quickly, and I suppose everyone but me drowned. I am an excellent swimmer and swam with all my strength. My life depended on it. But, after a while, I was too tired to swim anymore. Just as I was thinking, "I'm going to die too!" my feet touched the ocean floor. Slowly I struggled out of the sea. There were no signs of people on the beach and no houses. I could barely walk, so I lay down on the sand. Within minutes, I fell into a deep sleep. Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 2, Prisoner in Lilliput. When I woke up the next morning, I couldn't move. I must still be tired from all that swimming, I thought. But soon I discovered why I couldn't move. My body, arms, and legs were tied to the ground. Even my hair, which was long and thick, was tied down. I couldn't even move my head. How strange, I said to myself. I must be dreaming. The sun grew hot and shone in my eyes. All I could see was the sky. Soon I felt something crawling on my left leg. It must be a bug, I thought. It moved up my body almost to my chin. I looked down and, to my great surprise, saw a tiny man standing on my chest. He was about as big as my thumb, no more than 15 centimeters tall. In his hands, he held a bow and arrows. I felt many more little men crawling over me. In astonishment, I shouted very loudly, "Get off me, you insects!" They all jumped in alarm and screamed in terror. Some of the little men fell right off my body. I tried to loosen the ropes that held me down. Although the ropes were very thin, like thread, there were hundreds of them. Finally, I was able to free my left arm. The tiny men began to shoot arrows at me. Several arrows landed on my hand. Others hit my face and chest. "Stop that! It hurts!" I cried out. I decided to lie still and see what would happen next. The little people gradually became brave and came near me. They built a platform beside my head. One of them, an official of some kind, climbed onto the platform. He started speaking to me, but his language was not like any language I had heard before. The little men seemed friendly now. "I'm so hungry," I said, but they didn't understand me. With my free hand, I used signs to ask for food. The men brought me baskets of many different foods. I also drank 2 barrels of wine. Another official spoke to me, making signs with his hands as he talked. I understood that they were going to take me to another place. I fell asleep again. Later, I found out that the wine had contained something to make me sleep. I also learned about the island and what had happened while I slept. The island was called Lilliput. Its king lived in a castle in Mildendo, the capital city, which had high walls around it. The people made a huge cart and put me on it when I was asleep. I found out that it took 900 men to lift me onto the cart. 1,500 Lilliputian horses were needed to pull it. When we arrived near the city, the guards attached many chains to my ankle. Then, they cut the ropes that tied me down. At last, I was able to stand up and stretch. But because of the chains, I could not move about much. We were near a very large building just outside the gates of Mildendo. Well, I thought, it seems this building is to be my home. It was big enough for me to crawl into and lie down inside it. From outside my new home, I had a good view of the countryside. The fields were tiny, like small flower beds in my garden in England. Even the tallest trees were only about 2 meters high. Lilliput was a beautiful place, and everything in it was unbelievably tiny. Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 3, Visits from the King. One day, the king and queen came to visit me. Soon, a large, noisy crowd gathered, because people were very curious about me. Some people pushed others out of the way to get a better look. They wanted to see me and hear what the king said to me. The king was taller than most Lilliputians and moved gracefully. He and the queen wore magnificent clothes. I lay down on my side so that the king and I could observe each other more easily. He spoke to me for a long time, but I couldn't understand his words. Then, the king and queen returned to the palace. He left his guards to watch me and control the crowd. Some men in the crowd shouted and shot arrows at me. The chief guard ordered 6 of them to be caught and tied up. To punish them, the guard gave them to me. "Yum! You'll make a delicious snack," I said. I put 5 of the troublemakers in my pocket and picked up the 6th man between my finger and thumb. He struggled, and I moved my hand toward my mouth. He screamed. I took out my pocket knife and he thought I was going to cut him up. Instead, I cut the strings that he was tied with and put the man carefully on the ground. Then I took the other man out of my pocket. "Don't ever shoot at me again," I said as I set them free. Soon everyone in Lilliput knew about me, but people had trouble pronouncing my name. To make things easy, they called me Enormous One in their language. The king ordered his best scholars to teach me the Lilliputian language. I learn languages easily because I'm interested in people from other countries. In about 3 weeks, I knew enough Lilliputian to talk with the king. He came to visit me often. Each time, I asked him the same thing. "Please, Your Majesty, take the chains off my ankle."
"First, I must consult with my advisors,"
the king replied.
"Also, you must show my officers what is in your pockets."
"Your officers may inspect all my possessions," I said. I took everything out of my pockets, and the officers examined my things with great interest. Later, I read the report they wrote about my things. My handkerchief and my pocket knife were noted in the report, but the most interesting thing, the report said, is the large shiny engine. It makes a sound again and again. The Enormous One often looks at this engine. Lilliput has no clocks, so the officers didn't know what my gold watch was for. The Enormous One has another metal thing, continued the report. It is bent, and part of it is a long tube. My gun had been discovered.
"What is this thing for?"
asked the king. "I will show you, but it will make a loud noise," I explained. "Order your people to move away from that tree. I don't want anyone to get hurt." I pointed my gun at the tree and fired. Many people fell down or ran away or hid. The noise terrified everyone, including the king, but he calmed down quickly.
"You may keep your things,"
he told me.
"but I will keep the metal one that makes the big noise."
"It is my gift to you," I said. "Please be very careful with it and keep it locked up." Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 4. Gulliver Goes Free. I hoped to be set free one day, so I was nice to the Lilliputians. Gradually, they lost their fear of me. Sometimes the children even played hide and seek in my hair. One day, the king said to me,
"I invite you to attend an important performance. It is a contest called rope dancing. Come with me."
For this contest, a thin rope was tied between 2 poles very high above the ground. The people who wanted the best jobs had to dance on this rope. Each dancer tried to jump higher than the others. I had never seen such a dangerous sport. "Your Majesty," I said, "many dancers must fall and be hurt or killed."
"Yes,"
he replied.
"some break their arms or legs, and several have broken their necks. But I give the most important jobs in my kingdom to the men who are not afraid and jump the highest. These brave men will work hard for Lilliput."
What a strange way to choose who will work for the country, I thought. Then, as the king watched, I attached each corner of my handkerchief to a strong stick. I pushed the 4 sticks into the ground. My handkerchief was now under the rope, but above the ground. "Your Majesty," I said, "any dancer who falls will now land on my handkerchief and not get hurt."
"You are wise, Enormous One,"
said the king.
"I am pleased with your invention."
His family and many other people watched the rope dancing. "Would you and the queen like to see better?" I asked the king. I gently put them on my hand and held it beside the rope. They had a good view of the dancers. One very skilled performer turned several cartwheels on the rope. Then he held onto the rope and flipped his body right over it. The king and queen clapped loudly and cheered. Later, the king told me that he made this man one of his chief advisors. The king and I met often. He seemed to enjoy our conversations. One day, I said again, "Your Majesty, please set me free." This time he answered,
I have talked to my advisors. We agree that you have been good to our people. I will set you free if you make 6 promises.
"What must I promise?" I asked.
You must help my country in war and peace.
Said the king. "I promise." I said.
Before you visit the capital,
Continued the king.
you must give 2 hours warning. Then my people can get out of the streets.
I promise.
You must not step on my people or their animals.
I promise.
You must carry important messages for me quickly to anywhere in Lilliput.
I promise.
Also,
Said the king.
you must help my workers carry heavy objects.
I promise.
The last promise
Said the king.
is this. You must not leave the kingdom without my permission. If you do so, I will be angry.
I promise that too, I told the king.
Then you may have your freedom.
He said.
Unchain the enormous one.
The king ordered his men.
Now you can travel throughout Lilliput.
He said. Thank you, Your Majesty, I said. I would like to see more of your country.
When you come to the capital city, you may visit my palace.
The king said.
I'm sure you will find it the most beautiful you have ever seen.
Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 5, A Visit to Mildendo. On my first day of freedom, I went into the capital city, Mildendo. I stepped over the city walls and walked through the streets. Most of the houses in Mildendo had 3 to 5 stories. They were painted in many bright colors, and some had unusual patterns painted on them. People watched me curiously from every window. The city was a square, with 2 main streets that crossed in the middle of the city. These 2 streets divided Mildendo into quarters. The main streets were just wide enough for me to walk down. I could not go into the smaller streets though, because my feet were too big, and those streets were too narrow. Because the Lilliputians are so small, I had to walk very carefully so as not to step on anyone. "Hello," I said to people as I passed them. Some people waved. A man in a blue coat called out,
Welcome to Mildendo.
"This is the most crowded city I've ever seen," I said to him.
500,000 people live here.
He replied almost proudly. The king's palace was in the center of the city, surrounded by a high, thick wall. I climbed over the wall and lay down on the ground. From there, I could see into the palace rooms. Everything in the palace was beautiful, just as the king had said. In one room, I saw the queen talking with some ladies. When she saw me, she came to the window.
Enormous one,
She said.
welcome to our fair city. You may kiss my hand.
Her hand was smaller than the nail of my little finger. "I am honored to see you, Your Majesty," I replied. "Your palace is magnificent. In all my travels, I have never seen a better palace." I kissed her tiny hand very carefully. The queen and I talked for a little while. All things in Lilliput, the people, the birds, the animals, the plants and trees, are tiny. The people would fit nicely into my daughter's dollhouse. Even the tallest trees on the island are only a little taller than I am. When I first arrived, I was surprised at the smallness of everything. After a few weeks, though, I got used to it. Day by day, I learned more about the customs of Lilliput. In Lilliput, As in England, a person who does something bad is punished. The king of Lilliput, however, also rewards good people. If they obey all laws for 6 years, he gives them money.
What an interesting idea,
I said to myself.
The King of England does not reward people for good behavior. His people might behave better if he did.
One day, a visitor came to see me.
My name is Reldresal,
He said,
I am the king's chief assistant. I help him make decisions and take care of his important business.
I am very happy to meet you, sir.
I said to Reldresal.
Please thank His Majesty for giving me my freedom. Now I can explore your lovely island.
The king sets you free
Explained my new friend.
because he needs your help. Lilliput is in danger.
What kind of danger?
I asked.
That is a long story.
Reldresal replied.
Let me tell you a little of the history of Lilliput.
Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 6, Lilliput in Danger.
There are two political groups in Lilliput,
Began Reldresal.
the high heels and the low heels. The groups are named after the style of shoes their members wear. Once, the high heels were the most popular group.
Reldresal went on.
Our king and his officials, however, are low heels.
Do the two groups get along?
I asked.
Oh no, the two groups hate each other.
Said Reldresal.
The king is afraid that the high heels may try to take his power.
And could they?
Perhaps. We think that there are more high heels than low heels in Lilliput.
Said Reldresal.
What's worse, the king is very upset with his son, the prince of Lilliput. The prince wears one shoe with a high heel. His other shoe has a low heel. That's why the prince moves up and down as he walks. The king also has enemies in other places.
Reldresal continued.
Lilliput and a nearby island, Blefuscu, have been at war for 3 years.
That island to the east.
Reldresal nodded.
How did this war start?
I asked.
The war began over how people cut open boiled eggs.
Reldresal explained.
I beg your pardon?
I thought that I had misunderstood his words. I was still learning Lilliputian.
Boiled eggs.
He repeated.
People in Lilliput like to eat boiled eggs. An egg has a big end and a small pointed end. Almost everyone in Lilliput used to cut open their boiled eggs at the big end. The problem started when our king's grandfather was a little boy. He was then the prince of Lilliput, and his father was the king. One day, the prince cut open his egg at the big end. He got careless and cut his finger. The king got very angry because the prince was hurt. That day, the king made a new law. From then on, everyone in Lilliput had to cut open their boiled eggs at the small end. Small enders are people who obey the law. Big enders refuse to obey the law.
I suppose,
I said.
that these two groups also hate each other?
Correct. Over the years, they have had many fights.
Said Reldresal.
Our current king is a small ender. Some big enders have gone to live in Blefuscu. The king of Blefuscu would like to take over Lilliput, and the big enders support him. We have heard rumors that the Blefuscan king plans to attack Lilliput with many ships. Can you find a way to help us?
Reldresal,
I said.
I'm sure I can.
He told me that more than 50 ships were in the harbor at Blefuscu. Only about a kilometer of sea separates the two islands. The water between them is quite shallow. For the next few days, I kept away from the shore of Lilliput that is opposite Blefuscu. I did not want the Blefuscans to see me. I had figured out a plan for helping the king of Lilliput. But if the Blefuscans knew about me, my plan would fail. A few days later, I spoke to the king.
I have a secret plan,
I said.
to steal many of the Blefuscan ships. Then,
your enemies will not be able to invade Lilliput,
I would appreciate your help, enormous one.
replied the king. After I explained my plan, he said,
Tell me what you need to make your plan work.
Have your workmen make 50 very large metal hooks.
I told him.
I need lots of strong rope as well.
Those things will be ready in 2 days.
Promised the king. The look on his face was very serious. Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 7, Saving Lilliput. Two days later, everything I needed for my plan was ready.
This morning I will go to Blefuscu.
I told the king.
I hope your plan works.
He replied.
Lilliput's fate depends on you.
I'll be back soon.
I said. I went down to the shore, carrying the 50 hooks. Each had a rope tied to it. I took off my shoes and socks, waded into the sea, and headed for Blefuscu. The water between the two islands was shallow, so I could walk most of the way. Soon, I reached the harbor of Blefuscu. When the Blefuscans saw me, they were very frightened. I heard someone shout,
Ah! A giant! Run for your lives!
Another man screamed.
That monster will kill us all!
The Blefuscans jumped out of their ships and swam to shore. Many of the people shot arrows at me. To each ship, I attached a hook and rope. Then I gathered all the ropes and began to pull them. None of the ships moved.
What's the problem?
I wondered. Then I understood.
It's the anchors.
Each ship had a heavy anchor that kept it in place. I went from ship to ship and cut all the anchor ropes with my knife. Then I pulled on the ropes I had tied to the ships. Slowly, they started to move. I walked through the waves, pulling the ships behind me. On the shore, the Blefuscans shouted and screamed as I towed their ships away. They could do nothing to prevent me. Luckily, the tide was out and the water was becoming shallower. I did not have to swim and pull the ships at the same time. I could wade all the way back to Lilliput. The king of Lilliput and many other people were watching from the shore of that island. They could see the ships coming. They could not see me because only my head was above water. They were in despair. They thought that the Blefuscans were attacking Lilliput and that I must have drowned. As I neared the shore, I called out,
Long live the king of Lilliput!
When the king and his people finally saw me, they shouted,
Hooray! Welcome back!
They were very happy to see me. The king even came to meet me at the edge of the water.
My people and I are very grateful to you, enormous one.
He said.
You have saved Lilliput. Thank you.
I am happy that I could help you.
I replied.
You are very brave.
The king continued.
From now on, you will be one of my chief advisors.
That is a great honor,
I said to the king.
Now I would like to ask another favor.
He said.
Go back and steal the rest of the Blefuscans' ships. Then they will never be able to attack us again. I will have power over them forever. I will destroy all the big Endians. I will be king of everywhere.
I'm sorry, Your Majesty.
I replied.
I cannot agree to do that.
Why not?
He demanded.
Blefuscu is a good country like Lilliput,
I said.
and should be free like Lilliput. I think the two countries should live in peace from now on.
I want the rest of the Blefuscan ships.
The king insisted.
You must obey my order.
I cannot help you, Your Majesty.
I told him again. I tried to make him understand my point of view, but I failed. The king was very angry because I refused to do as he asked. Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 8, A Peace Offer. The king never forgot my refusal to take the rest of the Blefuscan ships. I had prevented the Blefuscans from attacking Lilliput, but he was still angry with me. Some of the king's men agreed with my decision.
You did the right thing,
one of them told me. Not everyone, however, felt the same way.
You are a traitor!
Another of the king's advisors growled at me. Through my friends in the palace, I heard that I now had some secret enemies. From then on, they and the king were against me. About 3 weeks passed. One day, the Blefuscan king sent 6 of his officials to Lilliput to speak for him. The officials had a long meeting with the Lilliputian king. Because I was still one of his chief officials, I was at the meeting.
Your Majesty,
said the chief official from Blefuscu.
our king would like to make peace with you. Blefuscu and Lilliput have been at war for too long. Many of our people have died or been hurt.
It has been a long war,
sighed the king. He and the visiting officials discussed how their countries could get along without fighting. The king of Lilliput wanted the king of Blefuscu to agree to certain conditions. After hours of discussion, the two sides reached an agreement.
I accept your king's peace offer.
The king of Lilliput said finally.
Tell him that I will have my chief official write up an agreement. Then your king and I will sign it.
I was surprised, but happy to hear Lilliput's king say this. The two countries would no longer be at war. The next day, the Blefuscan officials came to see me.
Our king has heard of your refusal to take the rest of his ships,
the chief official said.
He asked me to thank you. He thinks you are a generous giant. He invites you to come to Blefuscu for a visit.
I would be delighted to travel to Blefuscu and meet your king,
I replied.
I will ask the king of Lilliput for his permission to visit soon.
The Blefuscans were no longer angry with me for taking their ships. I was happy that they were ready to forgive and forget. Our meeting continued for a few hours. The Blefuscan officials were curious about me. They had never met a giant before, and they asked me many questions.
Would you do something to show us how strong you are?
One asked.
Of course,
I replied. Just outside my house was a large rock. It was much bigger than the tiny Blefuscans. I picked it up with both my hands. Even for me, it was quite heavy. I threw it into an empty field as the Blefuscans watched.
Your strength is amazing,
the chief official exclaimed. When the visit ended, he repeated his invitation.
Come to visit us soon in Blefuscu,
he said.
I will give a good report of you to our king.
A few days later, I had a chance to speak to the king of Lilliput.
Your Majesty,
I said.
The king of Blefuscu has invited me to visit his island. I would like to go. May I have your permission, please?
Yes,
the king replied, although his manner was quite cold.
You may visit Blefuscu, but let me know before you leave Lilliput.
Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 9, Fire at the Palace. From then on, the king of Lilliput did not demand much of me. I suppose that was because he no longer liked me. I could do as I pleased and go wherever I liked in Lilliput. Not long after the Blefuscan officials visited me, I had an opportunity to help the king of Lilliput. About midnight one night, people screaming outside my house woke me up. They were frantic and I could not understand what they were shouting. Suddenly, some palace officials arrived.
Hurry!
One of them cried.
You must come with us. It's an emergency. The palace is on fire.
Of course.
I replied and rushed to get dressed.
Jump onto my hand. I'll carry you all so that we'll get there quickly.
We hurried to the palace. The fire had started by accident in the room of one of the queen's maids. A burning candle had fallen over, and some curtains caught on fire. When we arrived, the fire was out of control. Many people were trying to put it out. 2 ladders were leaning up against the castle walls near the open windows of the maid's room. A man was at the top of each ladder. People were passing buckets of water up to those men. The men threw water on the flames, but it did not do much good. The Lilliputian buckets were tiny and held very little water. As each minute passed, the fire burned more strongly.
The fire spread to another room!
Cried one of the men on the ladder.
The whole palace might burn down!
Shouted the other one. A feeling in my body suddenly gave me an idea. The night before, I had drunk quite a lot of wine. The wine had made me very thirsty. So I had drunk a lot of water too, enough to fill about 20 Lilliputian barrels. I had felt so tired after drinking the wine that I had fallen asleep right away. I could feel all that water still inside me. The firefighters did not have enough water to put out the fire, but I did.
Stand back!
I shouted to them.
I will put out the fire. Please turn your backs to me and don't look.
I did just what a little boy would do when he is outside and needs to go to the bathroom. I aimed through the open windows at the fire. Soon, the fire was out.
Hooray!
Shouted the crowd of people who had been watching.
3 cheers for the enormous one! He has saved the palace!
The emergency was over, so I went back to my house. I was happy that I had been able to put out the fire, but I was worried that the king would not like the way I had done it. The king had a law about people doing what I had done right outside the palace. The next day, the king sent me a message. It said,
Enormous one, your behavior was against the law. I realize, though, that there was no other way to put out the fire. So I will excuse your bad behavior just this once. I am grateful that you saved my palace.
The queen was not as understanding as the king. My behavior disgusted her. She told everyone she would not allow the burned part of the palace to be repaired.
I will never go into those rooms again.
She said,
I will never forgive the giant. He has no manners.
Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 10, The Plot Against Gulliver. Several of the king's officials did not like me. One, whose name was Flimnap, hated me for some reason. Flimnap and his supporters had convinced the king that I was dangerous. They thought I was a threat to him and their country. Luckily, I had a friend who was a lord in the court of the king. Late one night, my friend visited me secretly.
Enormous one,
He said,
you know that you have enemies in Lilliput. Many of them are jealous of you. Flimnap tells lies about you. He says that you have done very bad things that are against the law. The punishment for these bad things is death.
I have always tried to help the king.
I said. I felt upset and began to shout.
I took the Blefuscan's ships for him. I saved the palace. I helped end the war.
Talk quietly. Flimnap's spies may be listening,
said the lord, with fear in his voice.
Flimnap will kill me if he finds out I've told you this.
What are my enemies saying about me?
I asked nervously.
They keep telling the king that you are against him,
replied my friend.
You did not return to Blefuscu and steal the rest of the ships. You did not help destroy all the big Indians. Your enemies here say that you are an enemy of Lilliput.
They are twisting the truth,
I said.
My actions were good.
The king of Lilliput reminded the bad officials that you had helped him.
The Lord went on.
But your enemies are very powerful. They suggested setting your house on fire while you are asleep in it. Then you would die in the fire.
What?
I exclaimed. I was very angry.
Flimnap and the others are evil men,
But the king decided that you will not be killed.
Said my friend.
Reldresal helped make things better for you.
Reldresal? What did he do?
He said you had made mistakes, but you had been a big help sometimes. He asked the king to be generous. He said that instead of being killed, you should lose your sight.
But that's horrible.
I was shocked.
Then you would still be strong enough to work for the king.
Explained the Lord.
But you would not be a threat to him or to Lilliput.
I thought Reldresal was a friend.
I put my hands over my eyes.
Reldresal will visit you in a few days to tell you about this. Then the king will order his men to shoot arrows into your eyes. You will be blind.
I can't believe anyone would do such a terrible thing,
I exclaimed.
but thank you for warning me about this awful plan.
Think about what to do,
Said my friend.
and make a decision soon.
The Lord left and went back to the palace. I stayed up all night and thought about what to do. I could kill the king and all the bad men. I did not like that idea. The king had been kind to me in the past. But because he was weak, he listened to Flimnap and the other bad men. It did not take me very long to decide that I must escape from Lilliput.
This is a very good time
I said to myself.
To go to Blefuscu.
Little Fox.